All right, y'all, welcome to the show. Got a bunch of stuff today. So Lula da Silva is cracking down on the coup plotters in Brazil. They, of course, had their own version of January 6th over there. It happened on January 8th, so I guess we're calling it January 8th. We'll talk about that. I have an amazing report that came out on how corporations under Trump were getting away with robbery. I mean, they weren't paying taxes. They weren't paying taxes. Again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then I also have an anti-woke caucus is now being formed in Congress. You can't make this stuff up if you tried. So buckle up. We got a fun one today. Let's go ahead and dive into it. So Lula da Silva is, of course, president of Brazil. And he was president for 2 terms. Then he got brought down on mucked up, totally fake political corruption charges. It was actually because of the great reporting of Glenn Greenwald, who sort of exposed how dirty the process was that locked up Lula. So he was freed as a result of that reporting, and he ran against Bolsonaro, and he beat Bolsonaro. So happy days, because Lula is basically a social democrat, and as his time as president in Brazil, he lifted 20 million people out of poverty. He raised the number of people in the middle class from, I believe the number was 53% to 70% in Brazil. He did this child allowance program, which basically the way that works is if you send your kid to school, you get a stipend, or, a check from the government. And he was super popular. He left with like a 90% approval rating. I mean, this guy was the real deal. It's very difficult to get a leader who, you look at them and you say, whether you win or lose on a various policy, I know as a matter of fact, this person's heart is in the right place and he's trying his best. And with Lula da Silva, that's exactly what we got. So Lula beats Bolsonaro. Honestly, no surprise. Bolsonaro was a terrible leader. And he didn't win by a crazy amount, but he won. Okay. So then they had their January 6th, January 8th, and yet they stormed the Capitol. And there were Bolsonaro supporters defecating in Congress. And it was like live streamed. The striking similarities between that and January 6th. So Lula sees this. And now, is he going to pull a Joseph Raisinette Biden move and be like, well, I don't know. Can I please have my stapler? I don't know if I want to handle this, but if you please give me my stapler, I'd really appreciate it. And maybe then you can, I go after you, or you're going to be mad at me, and I don't want you to be mad at me. And maybe what we'll do is hold some hearings and say, hey, this was very bad. Please don't do this again. Is he going to pull a classic Democrat move, which is like, let's fundraise off this, number one. Number two, let's virtue signal and be like, bro, January 6th is wrong, and it's bad, and it's not good, and let's investigate it. Let's talk about it endlessly. Let's have like primetime TV hearings and whatnot, and then let's do nothing. Let's do that. Let's do nothing. Remember, right after January 6th, there was a moment where there was real talk of invoking a part of the Constitution, which basically says, hey, if you try a coup, you're done. Like, you can never hold higher office ever again. And they didn't end up doing it. Now, mostly that was the Republicans' fault, of course, but the Democrats, in classic Democrat fashion, were like, let's go on a virtue signal tour. What is wrong with this? I'm trying to fix this camera, and the camera's telling me to fuck off repeatedly. Is that going to fix it? Let's see. Okay, there we go. All right. Leave it be, Kyle. Leave it be. Anyway, so the Democrats are doing classic Democrat finger wagging. Bad Republicans. Bad insurrectionists and coup plotters. Please don't do that again. We'll ask you very sternly. Well, Lula is going a different direction. Lula to purge Bolsonaro loyalists from Brazilian security forces after rampage. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva said on Thursday that security force members were complicit in letting an anti-government mob ransack the seat of power in Brasilia and promised to weed out hardcore supporters of his predecessor. The task of screening out those actors will be complex, his senior aide said, but investigations have begun to see who was responsible for letting backers of former President Jair Bolsonaro storm and vandalize the presidential palace. Quote, there were a lot of people who were complicit in this among the military police. There were many people from the armed forces who were complicit, Lula told journalists. I am convinced that the door to the palace was opened to allow these people in because I did not see that door was broken. Lula has also stepped up criticism of the army for not doing anything to discourage the 2-month-old encampment of Bolsonaro supporters outside its headquarters, where they have been clamoring for the military to overturn the result of the October elections. So, look, it all depends on how they do this, if it's fair or not, right? So, if you have somebody who's in the military or in the police force, and they voted for Bolsonaro over Lula, but they were against the coup attempt and, they believe in the peaceful transfer of power, that's a different story. For somebody like that, I wouldn't touch them because, in a free country, you're supposed to have dissenting opinions, you're supposed to have disagreement, and as long as the person wasn't involved in a crime, then they should be able to keep their job and there's no problem whatsoever. But people who actively took part in the very detailed attempt to spark an uprising and overthrow the government, yeah, if you had an organizational effort, you are guilty of a crime. And for those people, I'm 100% with Lula. Get rid of him. So again, I think a lot's going to depend on the execution of it. If he goes too far, if I see articles that describe, hey, he's getting rid of this person or that person, and that person was not connected to it, then I'll come out and say, I don't agree with that. But, we'll see how good the process is, and if the process just kicks out the people who were involved in the organizing of this thing, I think that's totally fair game. Now, the evidence that we have at this point is they're going to do it with a fine-tooth comb, and they're going to get rid of the people who need to be gotten rid of. Because here we have from France 24, former Bolsonaro minister arrested over Brazil riot. Okay, so they say, a former minister under defeated Brazilian ex-president Jair Bolsonaro was arrested early Saturday, local media reported, in connection with last week's sacking of government buildings. Anderson Torres, Bolsonaro's last justice minister, was arrested when he arrived in the capital Brasilia from the United States, where both he and his former boss were at the time of the riot. Thousands of Bolsonaristas invaded the seats of government in the capital on Sunday, breaking windows and furniture, destroying priceless works of art, and leaving graffiti messages calling for a military coup. More than 2,000 rioters were detained after the events, for which the full extent of the damage is still being calculated. A Supreme Court judge Friday that Bolsonaro will be included in an investigation into the origins of the sacking, which was sparked by anger at the far-right leader's election defeat to President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Torres was wanted under a Supreme Court warrant for alleged collusion with the rioters and stands accused of omission in his most recent job as security chief for the Capitol. Oh, wow. So he was the head of security for the Capitol. Gee, I wonder if he was involved in this. The new Justice Minister, Flavio Dino, said Friday that authorities would give his predecessor until Monday to return to Brazil or face extradition. Dino also confirmed the discovery at Torres's home of a draft decree proposing emergency steps for the possible correction of the October election, which Lula won by a razor-thin margin. The undated and unsigned draft bears Bolsonaro's name at the top, but Dino said the authorship was unknown. Torres said on Twitter the document was likely part of a pile of papers that were destined to be destroyed. He said the contents of the draft had been taken out of context to feed false narratives against him. Oh, false narratives. You're concerned about false narratives. You mean like the narrative that Bolsonaro actually won? That false narrative? Okay, so look. For this guy in particular, there was previous reporting talking about how this guy was in Florida with Bolsonaro and that he may have been involved in planning the attempted coup. And so it looks like the Brazilian authorities feel, oh, he definitely was involved in planning the coup, so we're going to arrest his ass. To which I say, based. Now, again, look at the difference between this and the United States. In the United States, so people did go down over January 6th, to be clear. And it was hundreds, maybe thousands of people. But what they did is they took the people on the ground the day of January 6th. And whoever actually committed crimes, whoever broke windows, whoever, stormed in, whoever was, taking pictures of classified documents sitting on top of senators' desks or whatever, like those people were tried. And, they were found guilty. A lot of them were. To the extent any organizers went down, though, first of all, it was very few. Second of all, it was more the marginal players, right? So, some Oath Keeper dude, the guy with the eye patch, I don't remember, was he part of the Oath Keepers or the Three Percenters or whatever, one of these right-wing groups, far-right militias, and he was there to try to overthrow the government, and he kind of admitted it, and so he's getting time. The head of the Proud Boys, I think, is on trial over this. So to the extent any organizers went down, it was from sort of the fringe groups, but like anybody who was internally involved with the Trump administration, among the Trump staff, those people, they haven't laid a glove on. And here you see the difference, because you have, a former Bolsonaro minister who's already arrested. And so they're letting him know, oh no, we're not messing around here. If you were involved in the plot to overthrow the election, even if it was doomed from the get-go because it was more of a riot than an organized attempt to get rid of him, just the fact that you tried to do that you were involved with that, you're donezo, son. You're done. We're throwing the book at you. It's a wrap. It's over. And I agree with that. Now, again, you need to be careful with how you go about this because civil liberties are massively important. So, in other words, anybody who was in January 6th and in January 8th in Brazil, anybody who was at the protest, but they just protested, like peaceful protesting, laws are laws, rules are rules, civil liberties are civil liberties, that person's free to go. It's the people who actually committed crimes, the people who actually stormed the building, the people who actually broke windows, the people who were defecating on a desk, the people who, whatever, fill in the blank with all the various crimes that were committed on that day. Those people throw the book at them, but also, and this is very important, throw the book at the people who organized, not just on the ground, but also the people who organized in positions of authority. And in the U.S., that's the one group that nobody's laid a glove on them. The people inside the Trump administration who were responsible for this, or the big-name media players who were involved in this. Those people have gotten away scot-free. And Lula is not looking like he wants to make that mistake. With Lula, the thing you have to look out for is, again, it'll all depend on how they execute this, how they go through with it, but like going after some people who maybe weren't as involved, like somebody who just protested on the ground who didn't storm the Capitol, like that person, I don't know how Lula's going to react with them, but, they really didn't commit a crime, should be fine. So you just have to keep an eye out for the overreach in the other direction, right? But again, with Lula, my instinct is he's probably going to be tough, but he's also going to be fair. And certainly arresting this guy is fair. So just look at the difference, man. And again, Lula is not some sort of radical. Lula's a social democrat. And just having like a principled, tough, smart social democrat in office versus a neoliberal corporatist like Biden. And look at the difference. Biden's scared of his own shadow. Lula's like, hey, you committed a crime, son. You're getting locked up. So here we go. We'll keep our eye on this, but the ball's already moving. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.